This is Street Knowledge with Chris Graham.
Welcome to the podcast. Chris Graham, my co-host is Jerry Carter. We normally talk on Fridays, but Friday I'm heading down to Blacksburg for the UVA Virginia Tech football game. And today's significant for Jerry because Jerry is in Maui. We talked about that last week. And today is the final day of basketball in the Maui Classic, Maui Invitational. And he's there watching all these great teams play. But, of course, Duke and Gonzaga will play later today, as we're recording this later today, for the Maui Invitational Championship. And, gosh, Jerry, you got to get some flavor, too. Watching on TV from home, of course, we don't get to see how nice it is outside in Maui. And we'll just assume that it's great weather there in Maui. But also, the environment there seems so interesting. Last night, watching Duke Auburn, it seemed like, in that relatively small gym, what a great environment that was. Can you take us there? Can you give us a sense of what it's like to be there on the ground?
Chris, it's been really amazing, and the learning curve of being over here has been unbelievable. As 40 years of attending sporting events, I've never seen a format quite like this one, and how it breaks down, and how the atmosphere is created. Because we talked last week about the number of seats that are available, and the number of seats that are available are 2,400, and there's 5 different ways that those seats are made available, and you see how using the Auburn Duke example, how the Auburn fans are sitting in the Auburn section, the Duke fans are sitting in the Duke section, and then there are some general admission tickets that are made available, and then after that, Chris, it becomes almost like a lottery in that for each game, they make 30 standing room only bracelets available. And how many different ways you can get into the building? I'll give you a great example. UVA has some history over here, and I'm sure the day will come when UVA will return over here. And I will have to say this, if the opportunity is there, man, you got to get on a plane, get your press credentials, and come experience this yourself. It really is a one-of-a-kind experience. And I was trying to pick my notes here in my own head. Just here's an example today, Chris. We're going to get playing ball here in just a little bit. There are 4 separate games being played today, and each time they're going to empty the gym. And for each of these 4 games comes with a different price tag if you're fortunate enough to end up with one of the general admission tickets. Now, if you're a fan and you came over here and you were buying the package, this is similar, Chris, to you and I are experienced with the ACC tournament, how they always sell their tickets in books, and it's kind of like being on the floor of Wall Street after your team loses in the opening round. You're going home, and you're in a situation where you're out there selling your tickets, and it's buy and sell and all sorts of trading going on. It's a fascinating thing to witness. Hey, none of that comes into play here because you're in a situation to where, unlike anything else, it's a one-game scenario. It's a one-game ticket. So let's just say you want to go see a basketball game today and you don't already have a ticket. Okay? The opening game is the game for 7th place, and that ticket is $27. Okay? Then they're going to go, Chris, from the 7th place game to the Duke Gonzaga game will get played in the 2nd slot, and that ticket is $157. Okay? Then they're going to switch back over, and then they're going to have Xavier in Illinois playing in what I like to call the please don't let me lose 3 times game. That ticket is also $27. And if you want to get into Auburn, Arizona for the 3rd place game, that ticket is $105. Add this to the mix, and it's just trying to capture the setup of this. You add it to the mix of if you have the regular seats, you paid $156 for a game. So using that as an example, let's say you came over here and you're an Illinois fan, and they're playing in the 7th place game, and you know that you paid $156 for your ticket. Well, the people that gambled that they could get in on general admission are watching the same game for $27 and basically the same seating. And again, that's just one angle to how different this is. But that's how the atmosphere that you're seeing gets created. There are very, very few casual basketball fans attending this event. You might have neutral fans, but very few casual fans. And I also will add Gonzaga's backers. There are as many Gonzaga fans here as there is Duke fans. Now, with that same note, the folks from Gonzaga, again, they're a team from back home for us. They had a short flight to Portland and then a 6-hour flight over, but they are here in groves, and only a lucky handful are going to get into that, to the point where I would have to say, we've always joked about what's the hardest ticket to get in sports. For years, people would tell you it was the night race at Bristol. Other people would say it's the Super Bowl. I would have to say it's a ticket to the Maui Invitation. And that might sound bizarre to some people, but even if you came over and was going to cover UVA, I'm not even sure how many press credentials can be issued in a scenario, and they were joking about it yesterday about having a Final Four atmosphere in a high school gym. That was a long first answer, but that's where the atmosphere comes from. It's a situation to where there aren't casual people in there. Those are the diehard fans, the diehard boosters for the most part, that got those tickets, and it creates an amazing atmosphere.
Yeah, I guess we talk about scarcity. That's the reason this is a hard ticket. The night race at Bristol has 150,000 seats. You can, it's hard to, there's a lot of people who want to go to that, but there's plenty of inventory. It's hard to get to Maui, but if you're there, it's scarce. So I want to know too. So watching last night, I watched the entirety of the Duke Auburn game, and what I thought was so neat about it was, I've covered, of course, I cover home games on campuses an awful lot. I cover ACC tournaments, NCAA tournaments, where most of the fans in a tournament situation are sort of casual fans, or they're not necessarily fans of any one team. They're just kind of there. And as you mentioned, Jerry, the fans who are there at Maui are you got your Duke fans, you got your Auburn fans, you got your Gonzaga fans, etc. The hardcore fans. They've traveled all this way. They're there for a reason. They're there to watch their team. So last night during the game, and basketball being a game of runs, it really lends itself to this so well. Duke goes on a run. The Duke fans go crazy. They're loud. And then all of a sudden Auburn hits a three and maybe gets a steal and they hit another three, and then the Auburn fans are loud. That's so different because on campus you don't get that. On campus, the home team crowd goes crazy. There's really not a visiting team crowd. In those conference tournament, NCAA tournament situations, it's largely not that way. So last night is unique. What we saw last night was so unique because of the fact that there are two very loud, throaty fan bases, and they respond when their team does well. That's what it came across on TV. What was it like being in the gym?
Well, it was every bit of that, and I want to add one other note to your thought process. Let's go to a format. You mentioned the on-campus thing. Let's go to the first and second round. You've covered a few of these. The first and second round of the NCAA. And here we are. It's March Madness, and you're in a situation to where the teams are blocked off in fours. So let's just say that Virginia's playing. I'm just going to pick a name out. They're playing Butler. Okay, and in the second game, the North Carolina fans are there, and North Carolina's playing Davie. Okay, so now you're sitting there. Now you have two games. You're in the building for 5 hours.
Yeah.
Okay, then you have the same thing in Indianapolis when we were there a couple of weeks ago. You're sitting there. Michigan State's playing Kansas. That's a phenomenal basketball game. Okay, but the energy in the building was almost non-existent because the fans were there to see Kentucky play Duke. Okay, so it didn't matter that there were 20,000 fans in that first game. 16,000 of those fans we're trying to chat on Facebook and take pictures and talk about, the Big Blue Nation, or if you're a Duke fan. So what you've done is you've eliminated people that are just filling seats. And what you have is diehard fans. You did have a couple, children in there. Somebody's got enough money that they got tickets for their kids as well. But you're in the situation to where you're playing in the true to form Cracker Box gym, and you're only allowing 2,430 people in. And the only people that don't have a bleeding, dying, rooting interest are the 30 to 40 NBA executives that are there doing the scouting. And great example, they joke about it. It's the one time in the NBA where the GM or the president will pull rank instead of sending somebody off to the Cincinnati for a tournament. They think, I'll just go see this one. And you see people like Danny Ainge yesterday. It's not Boston's scout team that's there. It's Danny Ainge, and it's one of those things to where there hasn't been too many things left in life I hadn't been able to experience as a sports fan that was truly of interest to me. And this one here, the whole format is really quirky on how they issue the tickets and what you have to do to get into the. To give you an example, Chris, to get into the Duke San Diego State game on opening day. This is just the opening day matchup, and there were all of the tickets were sold except the 30 standing room only vouchers, which vouchers turn into bracelets. Okay, so Lynn and I were trying to, again, we were far enough down the Duke food chain. Okay, so in other words, just being a booster, somebody who writes a check doesn't get you these tickets. We're far enough down that we ended up on the waiting list, so the only way we're getting into the Duke San Diego State game is to be in line to get one of those 30 vouchers. Okay, the box office doesn't open until 8:30. Okay, the first people showed up to stand in that line at 3:45. So now you're talking Black Friday craziness. So that's where your juice comes from. That's where your energy in that building comes from, is there are no casual fans in there. If there are 2,430 people, they all have a vested interest in being there. And even today, even if you cut the TV on in a little bit, and for the 7th place game and the 5th place game, you're still going to see that level of energy. And that's how they've done it. They've bottomed something up unlike any format of any tournament I've ever seen. Just the concept, you see the crowd, you hear the noise. Obviously after that game, Gonzaga, last night after the Auburn game, Gonzaga's playing Arizona. You have to herd those people out. Okay, all this is going on while the teams are warming up. They have to empty that entire building. They have to check the bathrooms, make sure nobody's trying to be sneaky Pete and get to hang in there. So while the in-between games, when they go back to the studio and you're watching it on TV, the in-between games, that's what they're doing. They actually have to herd the people out one side of the building and let the next group in. And it creates an atmosphere that I don't want to say second to none, but it's the atmosphere that plays through on the television.
So for our Virginia fans who are listeners out there, of course, so many of our sports podcasts deal specifically with UVA sports. This whole tournament exists because of a UVA game in Hawaii that otherwise would have been forgotten if things had gone the way they were supposed to. Virginia played Chaminade on a trip back from Japan. That great Ralph Sampson team had beaten a really good Houston team in Japan on the way back. They weren't an excuse to stop in Hawaii. They played Chaminade at that time, an NAIA school, and Chaminade pulled the massive upset of all time until Virginia lost to UMBC in the NCAA tournament last year. But because of that, then this Maui Classic was born, and so that's why that's out there. And good for Chaminade that they were able to turn this into something that is a annual moneymaker. So now let's talk some actual basketball, Jerry. And I'm sure the average Duke fan out there would not agree with this statement, but I would bet that Coach K would. Last night we saw Duke challenged really for the first time this season by an Auburn team that obviously a top 10 team that has pedigree, that's had some success in recent seasons, and and the reason I think Coach K would like this is he needs to see his team in these situations where it's a relatively tight game. The final score was a 6-point margin. It was really not quite that close. Duke had a relatively comfortable margin in the second half. At one point it was 17. It got down to 8. The final score was a 3 with 5 seconds left after the game was sort of decided. But still, Duke had to make some big plays to keep it at that sort of slightly comfortable working margin. And so you saw these freshmen challenged. That's my perspective, Jerry. What's your thought on that?
Well, here's the thing, and you go back to anybody, Chris, on the 91 team. The 91 team that, of course, the 90 team just got crushed by Vegas in the national championship game by 30 points. And so Vegas comes back the next year, and they're undefeated. They're double-digit favorites to run the table, finish undefeated, and maybe, Chris, go down as the greatest college team ever. So Coach K, Grant Hill, Christian Laettner, whoever you're talking to, they're going to tell you the same thing. The game plan was to play it close, to make Vegas sweat, that if you were still in the game at the end, okay, you had a chance because Vegas had been challenged by nobody. Now, I want to stop for half a second. I'm not saying that Duke's going to go into the Final Four undefeated. That's not the point. But yes, you're absolutely correct. Coach K would be ecstatic from the effort last night.
Well, let me interject real quick, Jerry, and then I'll let you finish. I think Virginia last year was in the same place. Now, Virginia wasn't undefeated last year, but the Virginia team last year lost 2 games. One was at West Virginia relatively early in the season, and it was a tie game with a minute to go, and they lost that game on the road. And then they lost one other game at home to Virginia Tech, in a game they lost by 1 point in overtime. They get to the NCAA tournament, and they have adversity with UMBC, and they had not faced that kind of adversity. So, yeah, you need to be tested. And so, yeah, I thought I'd interject that because I think it makes the same point you make about Duke UNLV from 20-plus years ago, that, yeah, you need to be tested and see how you react in those kind of situations.
Well, it's a unique situation in the fact that the Auburn game, Chris, started out the same way the Kentucky game did. Duke came out, they kind of did whatever they wanted to, and by the time they got comfortable, they were up 17. That's the same way they started with Kentucky. Okay? Kentucky just couldn't answer it. Kentucky just had no answer for Duke, and that's how 17 became 34. So Auburn, and you got to give Bruce Pearl credit for this. And afterwards, I got to see the pregame speech he gave and the halftime speech that he gave, and it was a situation to where he kept his kids in that game, and his guards, who have been, different people here are saying they're the most underrated players in the tournament, because they kept shooting. And that's what the shooters have to do. At one point, they were like 2 for 14 collectively, and they kept shooting. And when you keep shooting, you're in a situation to where I think they ended up combining for 41 points. A lot of people, if you start off slow, you're going, is this still my shot? They kept at it, and Auburn did a nice job. They did cut it to 5. Was the closest they got it. And it was a situation to where the one thing that Duke answered, and again, there are some people that are going to be tough matches. I think Texas Tech in Madison Square Garden is going to be a good game. I think that when they go up against UVA, and of course when they go up against Mayheim, so I can see this team getting beat 3 or 4 times. But what they did last night was they never flinched. They were playing a very, very, very talented basketball team, and the difference. Everybody wants to compare this team to that team. I only compare them to last year. Chris, did you notice the level of defense that Duke Blue Devils played yesterday? That was nowhere to be found last year. I mean, Marquise Bolton flirted with a triple-double, with the third number being the blocks. I've never seen a game at any point through my 40 years of watching Duke where they had double digits in block shot. You're seeing their ability to play defense. I think that Zion is in a situation to where he is going to have his moments, but Bolden came there from Texas, from a high school in Texas 3 years ago, and he was pegged to be an ultimate one and done. McDonald's All-American. His freshman year doesn't work out because of an injury. His sophomore year doesn't work out. But what did he do, Chris? A lot of those players just say, screw it, I'm going to go sign up for the draft. He's worked on being a better player. And to see him yesterday, his line was 11 points, 9 rebounds, and 7 blocked shots as the fifth starter. And it's a situation to where Auburn threw a punch, a counter punch, and Duke is still standing. But again, the beauty of being over here in Maui, they're going to face a whole nother challenge tonight.
Well, and I want to go back to your point on defense. Last year's Duke team was so bad defensively that Coach K, who hates the zone defense, had to go to a zone defense because that's the only way they could get stops. That's how bad they were defensively. Last night is the first chance I got to see them really play, and I would even throw out the Kentucky game now probably looks a little less impressive in one sense. Kentucky beat VMI by 10 the other day. Kentucky's having its own issues right now. They'll be better, but right now they're not playing great. But this Auburn team was effective because, and what they were able to do, I assume that Kentucky wasn't. Auburn's a veteran team. It's a team with, they're not a bunch of first-year players. It's a veteran group, great backcourt, and what Duke did so effectively, though, because Auburn's best players are their two guards. You mentioned Harper and Brown. Those are their two best players. They're dribble drive guys. They love to get in the lane and create either shots for themselves or kick it back out for each other or other teammates on the perimeter. And what Duke did last night, and these guys did so well, was they took that away. Auburn adjusted at halftime, and you could see that they were spreading the floor better. They had better spacing in the second half, and that's why they shot better in the second half, especially from three-point range. They were 6 of 13 for 3 in the second half after going 5 of 19 in the first half. First half, they were shooting threes because they were getting to the end of the shot clock frustrated, throwing up shots and hoping they would go down. Second half, Auburn got some better shots. But Duke dictated defensively. And that's something that last year's team and the team the year before did not do, was dictate to opponents defensively. And and I'll give Auburn credit for this. I don't know that, despite the fact that Auburn's got a great backcourt, I don't know that I would take a single player on the Auburn roster over anybody on the Duke roster last night. Auburn hung with them, and they uglied the game up. And I think that will be something that opposing coaches, you mentioned, Jerry, UVA, Texas Tech, potential tough games. Obviously, North Carolina, at least the game in Chapel Hill, probably both of those games. I mean, Duke's going to lose some games this year, likely just because of the tough schedule. But what those opposing coaches will do is they'll ugly the game up too, like Auburn did last night. And they'll cut down those lanes, those driving lanes. Because and here's what I'll say impressed me about Duke. The defense impressed me. It's the composition of this roster. Unfortunately, it's only going to last for 1 year, but those guys, Williamson, Reddish, Barrett, and Jones, and I'll talk about Jones after I'll talk about Jones a little later on more specifically. But those 4 guys spread the floor so well. They play like an NBA team, and I don't mean that from a talent standpoint. Yes, we know their top 3 guys are all going to be probably the 1, 2, and 3 picks in the draft. I don't say they play like an NBA team from the perspective of that. I say they play like an NBA team because, and Jay Billis said this a lot on the broadcast last night, except for Bolden, they're positionless. Those other 4 guys, Jones is smaller. He's more of a traditional point guard, but he can guard the big guard. But those other 3 can guard anybody. They can play offense from any position. And so positionless basketball is where the NBA is going. And at least this year's Duke team can play positionless basketball. That's what will make them dangerous, particularly in March, because those 3 guys are basically interchangeable from a position standpoint. And so very impressed offensively, defensively. This is a much better team than last year's team, which of course had great draft picks come out of it. But I think this year's team is built better for the long run.
Well, one of the questions you asked me early on, and it was a viable question because of last year. They were so thin from a true to form point guard that there was a number of games where Grayson Allen had to come. Grayson Allen is a number 2, and he had to get moved to the point guard to keep the offense going. So earlier on this year, you asked me who's going to pass the ball. Well, there's 4 guys. There's 4 guys that can play the point. And that's the nutty part about Williamson. It's a situation to where it's something to where he can bring the ball up the court. Barrett can bring the ball up the court. Reddish can bring the ball up the court. And, of course, Jones. And Jones was against San Diego State. That was something to where they needed him to be a little bit more aggressive offensively. And he put up 14 points very quickly. So I know that his role won't be to shoot first, but that's a great analogy if I'm playing an NBA style, but they run up and down, and the Illinois game, the Auburn game was so much more enjoyable to watch than the San Diego State game because San Diego State was trying to slow the game down. And Auburn says, no, we're going to just run this. We're just going to run with you. And it made it that much more entertaining to watch.
Barrett shoots too much for my liking. Maybe that's the guy who watches a lot of Tony Bennett basketball, but he shot the ball 20 times last night, and it wasn't particularly effective. 7 of 20 from the field, 2 of 8 from 3. Williamson, in my opinion, last night was the first time I watched this team. I watched him play a good team, so I'm glad I waited to watch him play a good team like Auburn. Williamson needs to be fed the ball more. And Williamson, to me, if I were using him, I guess he's 6'6" and he's 275. We all know that, and he can throw it down and he can do all stuff. I would play him like Barkley. I would play him as a guy that either at 2 or 3, whoever he's matching up with, who's got the unfortunate assignment of guarding him defensively, is going to be, even if he's as tall as Williamson, if he's 6'7", 6'8", whatever the case may be, Williamson's got strength and size on him, and just like Barkley did back in the days in the 90s, I would use Williamson less probably on the perimeter than Duke seems to be using him, and a little more where I'd clear some space for him in the post and let him operate there, either post or just face up in the post and drive past guys, because he's so quick for that size. I would have him shoot the ball 20 times and have Barrett shoot less if it's me. And I'll throw this out too, Jerry, so that you can comment on all this stuff. To me, okay, so all the attention goes to Barrett, Reddish, and Williamson. To me, and this is probably, again, this is the basketball nerd guy saying this, Jones is the most important player on this team for the reason you said there. I don't know that any of those 3 guys. I still worry about, if I were a Duke fan, I'd worry about the fact that I don't know that they that they're going to be looking out for each other in the sense of they're all looking to be the number 1 pick in the draft. Jones isn't going to be the number 1 pick in the draft. He's the key to this team because he's the guy who will get the ball to the guys in the right places. I think he's however well he plays and adapts and grows this season, he's going to be the key to this Duke team's success in March and April.
Yeah, I think that's a safe statement. And you mentioned the nerd aspect of it. I want to go with, if he's 1, there's a 1A, and the 1A being Jack White. Uh-huh. I've been following Jack White for a couple of years now, and same way I followed David Robinson's son. You're going, oh, okay, well that's nice. He's on the roster, and Jack White has taken his game to a whole nother level. And you're sitting there, and these guys play a very aggressive defense, to the point where they're going to pick up fouls. They're going to try to block shots, and they're going to try to steal balls. They're going to be in a situation to where they're going to pick up fouls. And it's a situation now where they're able to just take and bring Jack White in there. And Jack White, he's capable of scoring. He can shoot the 3. He's gonna flirt with averaging a double-double. And he was in a situation to where he chases down loose balls. He's not afraid to hit the floor. And it's a situation to where I think he is as important as Tyus Jones from the standpoint, and it's been the case each game, Chris. They do pick up fouls. And the majority of the fouls they pick up are from playing overly aggressive defense. And I'll take that. I'll take hustle fouls. I'll take, I love the energy they have on the defensive end. And you said it correctly. Duke's defense last year was so poor that it was a situation to where that Coach K had to play his own. So you're not gonna see that this year. And you have a couple other players down the line that are stepping up. So the question was, who was going to be the fifth starter? I guess in my mind, where the fifth freshman is concerned, Joey Baker was another highly touted recruit who reclassified and came a year early. And nobody's talking about him right now, so we're not sure. He gave up his senior year in high school to come to Duke. Because we haven't heard anything, Chris, I'm starting to think that they are going to redshirt him. And most people who don't have, most people that come to school thinking they're a one and done aren't really interested in redshirting. So, and I'm glad, I'll be glad if that happens, because then we can stop the rebirth of the Fab Five. Of all of the conversations that are taking place and everything that's going on, and everybody's having to compare these guys to somebody, they're not doing that. But the one that's going out that's getting a lot of steam right now is the situation is, hey, if this Duke team plays the Fab Five, and you're sitting there going, why don't we just let them be kids? And we only get them for a year. Can we just have fun with it? But yes, Tyus Jones is going to be important. I think Jack White is going to be important. Marquise Bolden he's now playing like the young man that came over there 3 years ago.
And think about that Fab Five group too. I've heard that comparison a lot, and I think back to the Fab Five. Of that group, I mean, there were the two guys. There were two guys, Jimmy King, and I'm trying to think of the other guy that didn't really have NBA careers afterwards, and then the three guys who we remember from that group, Chris Webber certainly, and he's probably a Hall of Fame guy. If he's not, he's a very close to being Hall of Fame NBA player. Jawan Howard had a very workmanlike, long career. Never quite the star that maybe we thought he'd be, but he was a very effective post player for a long time for a lot of teams. Jalen Rose was the flashiest guy at Michigan, but so he had a long NBA career, kind of a journeyman career, but a long career. So I would hope for the Duke fans are hoping that these three guys collectively have a better, because Fab Five, let's just call them the Fab Three, because the five guys played, but three guys were really the star players. That these three guys have a better collective run in the NBA than those three did, and I think they will. I mean, Williamson, to me, I like his game. I liken him to a Barkley type, just because of his size and his ability around the rim. Last night, he was only 4 of 8 from the floor, only shot the ball 8 times, so I'll say that. I think his shot selection is great. He doesn't overplay his hand, I guess I should say. Reddish was in foul trouble. Didn't really get a good feel for him last night. And Barrett, my only feel for him is he shoots too much. Maybe needs to sublimate himself a little bit more within the system. But I hear the comparisons to him, and well, I won't even throw that out there. But those guys, I think your guys there, they're clearly touted for a good reason. But I also agree. Yeah, let's just let them be college kids. They've played, what is it now? They've played 4 games in 5 games in college. So let's let them be college guys. Let's let them be 18-year-olds for a little while longer before we have to worry about all that other stuff.
And the one thing I wanted to mention to you, and again, my familiarity with the Gonzaga program goes back 3 decades now, in the fact that my previous 10 years out here on the West Coast, the fans, again, your UVA fan base, you want to know about Gonzaga because you're going to cross paths with them somewhere down the road. I really believe that Gonzaga has that level of talent, and it's a situation to where the one thing, Dan Munson, going back a little bit before most people's time, Dan Munson is the one that built the Gonzaga program. and Mark was his lead assistant. And it was back in '99 that Munson realized that Mark was going to leave and go get another job. He actually, if you will, took the bullet. And I question why he took the Minnesota job, but he turned the program over to Mark. They have not missed the NCAA tournament under Mark, and you're now finishing out your second decade in that situation. Your second decade. Now, people say, "Oh, well, they only play this competition. They only play this competition," and then they took it to the next level 2 years ago when they lost championship game to North Carolina. But the thing where Gonzaga's concerned, everybody talks about Duke's one and done. Everybody talks about Kentucky's one and done. Gonzaga has a three-pitched fork, if you will. I jokingly call him transfer you. And Mark came up with a plan and had a great deal of success with it, to where he's constantly bringing in 2 or 3 players from other programs. And so his team is never going to look young. Gonzaga is never going to look young to you because they have a heavy mix of players. And they have 5 guys who could go out tonight and score 25 points on him. Not 1, not 2, not 3. I'm not trying to sound like LeBron, but the situation that they have is unbelievable, and it's a combination of where they get these people from and how they get them to come to the program. And it's a situation to where I'll give you some actual examples in regards to this year's team. Okay, you got Brandon Clark, and people who watched the game last night will be very familiar with Brandon Clark. Brandon Clark signed on, went to San Jose State, and he played his freshman year at San Jose State. Mark has created a system, Chris, that what systems only work if you have a success story. And the greatest success story in the transfer version of his game is Kelly Olynyk. Kelly Olynyk was a backup forward at his first school. He transferred to Gonzaga, went into their program, went into their off-season / sit-down season, redshirt season program, came out, became an All-American, and is now a star in the NBA. So when you have a game plan on how to be successful, and then you have someone like that, now you can say, hey, guys, look what happened here. So you've got Clark that came in from San Jose State. Another guy you've got tonight that hope they'll get some action and is a scorer is Gino Crandall. Crandall went to North Dakota. Now, again, mid-major. I think they played Kentucky the other night. He graduated there, and he joined Gonzaga as a graduate transfer. So now, another game you're going to see, and I'm going to always say this guy's name wrong, Petrusev, okay? Now, you want to talk about young versus, experience. This young man, Chris, as a 14-year-old, signed to play with the Serbian national team. Okay, so at a point in our lives where you and I were trying to get ready for, middle school or junior high school, if you will, this guy was playing on the Serbian national team. And you just go down and you're in a Zach Norvell Jr., 6'5" guy. But he never came off the court last night. He played the entire 40 minutes against Arizona. So it's a situation as much as Auburn impressed people with their game, you're in it now. And then the scariest part about Gonzaga is their best shooter, Killian Kelly, okay, is injured right now. So you've got 5 guys that could score 20 points in a college basketball game. And that's before you add their best shooter to the lineup.
Yeah, you look at
it's scary.
You look at their box score from last night. Hachimura 24, 10 to 16 shooting. Norvell Jr. you mentioned he had 20, 10 rebounds. Clark and Perkins both 18. Gosh, Clark was 8 of 9 from the field. Perkins 7 of 11 from the field. I mean, yeah, the team shot 53.1% last night, and that's with shooting. Now, here's a number that jumps out at you. They shot 34 of 64 from the field, 9 of 29 from 3. So that tells you that from 2, they were 25 of 35. I mean, they're a classic. Now, I talk about how Duke plays an NBA style of ball. Gonzaga is a 3 or post team. You know, mid-range jumpers, the basketball nerds will tell you, you know, mid-range jumpers don't do you any good. A 15-foot jumper, a 17-foot jumper, they're contested usually, they're tough, and they only get you 2 points. A layup or a dunk gets you 2 points. You might as well keep going towards the rim and get closer and get a better shot. Well, you know, Gonzaga does that great. They shoot threes, and then they shoot, you know, in the post. And so they're a hard-nosed, very efficient team and a good defensive team. And, you know, both these teams going in, there's a third game in 3 days. They both rely heavily on their starting 5, a couple of bench guys who get some minutes. So there won't be any advantage or disadvantage there necessarily. The disadvantage, as you said, Jerry, is that Gonzaga is missing one of its you know, key guys, but they still have riches to go back to. So this game at 5 o'clock today, our time, you know, on the East Coast, is a definite. Okay, it's Wednesday before Thanksgiving, so we're already not thinking about work. So it's a good excuse to plop down in front of the TV at an otherwise odd time to watch college basketball. And then for our Virginia fans out there, we play at 9:30 tonight in the Battle for Atlantis. So, you know, sit back, get a couple of previews of what ACC is going to be like this year because, you know, Duke Gonzaga, Virginia starts with Middle Tennessee State, a team that, you know, just barely missed the NCAA tournament last year. Couple good games coming up, and then Virginia's got a whole run through the Battle for Atlantis with a really loaded field there as well. But, yeah, this Duke-Gonzaga game is clearly, I mean, you got number 1 versus number 3. It's a Final Four type game being played on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving at 5 o'clock. It's a rare treat for fans and a great opportunity to get some good basketball in.
The one player that, when you're looking at it, the young man from Japan, okay, because I don't know if you realize this or not, he's their leading scorer. He's averaging 23 a game. This young man was a freshman, Chris, on the national championship runner-up team. Okay, he couldn't play. He couldn't play because he couldn't speak the language when he came over. So you want to talk about a hungry player? You leave Japan, you come over to Gonzaga. You're on a phenomenal team, and he literally couldn't pick up the verbiage to play. He played his freshman year, but he did not play in the situation of the national championship game. He actually couldn't play because they couldn't play him from a communication standpoint.
I'll throw out there, jumping around a little bit here, but I'll throw around for our listeners out there. I happen to be looking through other box scores from the Maui Invitational, and Mario Shayok, a name we might remember, UVA fans might remember. Mario Shayok transferred out a couple years ago. He had 1 season left to go. DeAndre Hunter developed and turned out to be a pretty good development for UVA basketball, and Shayok saw the writing on the wall and decided that, hey, I'm not going to sit on the bench for my last year of school. I'll transfer, wait out at an odd time after your junior season, transfer, wait a year, and then play my senior season at Iowa State. Well, Iowa State's 1-1 in this Maui Invitational, and Shayok has 19 points and 17 points in those 2 games. So glad to see Shayok playing well. And I'll tell a quick Mario Shayok story. It's an odd one, but Crystal and I, my wife Crystal and I, were over at the Raising Cane's, the little fast food place over in Charlottesville. Crystal's favorite fast food place. There's not one in our area here in Waynesboro. So whenever we go to Charlottesville, we got to go to Raising Cane's. Well, Shayok was there with a couple of guys, a couple of managers from the basketball team. It was off-season day. We were there in the spring. And Shayok went out of his way to hold the door open for Crystal when she was walking through with her food. And she said, hey, who is that? Because he looks familiar. And I said, that's Mario Shayok. And she said, what a nice young man. He said, thank you. He said, after she said thank you, he said, thank you, ma'am. And just what a nice gentleman he was. And so, odd story to tell about a guy who's over in Maui playing for Iowa State. But Mario Shayok's in our minds, and he's playing well. Good to see that happen.
I will try to sneak in one more, and we'll call it the basketball nerd note. I don't know how many people were watching the Duke San Diego State game, okay? And I know, and again, the guy who's coaching San Diego State was actually the one that recruited the Fab Five to Michigan, and he was the assistant at Michigan, and then he spent 18 years as Fisher's assistant, and then he now has the team. There's 7 minutes to go. 7 minutes to go in the game. This might not have, anybody else might not have noticed this. Okay. There's 7 minutes to go in the game. Duke has 87 points. They have cleared the bench to the point where there's nobody left out there. Okay, none of the starters, nor Jack White. So he has literally put everybody in there. Coach K has put everybody in there that he could put in there. San Diego State left their 3 best players on the floor until the 30-second mark. Uh-huh. And I just was stunned by that because you're sitting here. I don't know if it was, hey, we're going to hold these guys under 100 or what the case was. And I don't know if the average fan would have noticed. But you're talking about playing 3 games in 3 days in a box. I didn't understand the mindset of having your starters finish that game when you were at the point. Now, the final score in the game turned out to be 90-64. So they did hold Duke to 3 points over the last 7 minutes. But it was just that was an odd moment to me as to what the thought process was in the in the coaching decision there, because San Diego State's best player, they're saying, is a lottery pick. And to leave them on the floor like that to play against what I would consider basically the end of Duke's bench, just it stuck out to me as a little bit to where if I had been in the post game, I might have seen the post game interview, I might have just asked about that.
You know, I didn't watch that game to be able to tell you situationally. Maybe I will say there was a Virginia game earlier this season. Virginia played George Washington, and Tony emptied the bench with maybe 11 or 10 minutes left, something like that. And Virginia was up 25. The game was 25 at halftime, so it was over very early. But the reserves didn't play well, and it wasn't that the score got close. I don't think that was the reason. But with 6 minutes to go, it was 20 points at that stage. And with 6 minutes to go, Tony brought the starters back out. And I thought it was to send a message to those bench guys, in his case, to send a message to those bench guys, hey, I'm not accepting the way you guys played, and so I'm going to make the starters play 4 more minutes. And maybe those are the kind of things you do. And again, I don't know. I wasn't watching that game to know if that was – maybe he was sending a message to his own team there to say, I'm not going to accept you playing this poorly because we think of ourselves as an NCAA tournament type team. And so we're going to play more so you can get some better reps. I don't know if that's the case, but I do know in Virginia's case at least, and that was something Tony talked about after the game, that, hey, I wanted to send a message to my guys that we needed to play harder. And the funny thing was, in the case of Tony, he brought his starters back in with 6 minutes to go, took them back out with 2 minutes to go, and they seemed to be out of it too. So, but the next game they came out, they played a team comparable in talent to George Washington in Coppin State, and they won by 57, set a record for points in the Tony Bennett era, held Coppin State to 40, so I think message was sent. I mean, that was a blowout game, so it's hard to get too much out of that, but they did come out and take care of business and play harder and more effectively. So sometimes coaches do that, and it seems odd to us, and I'm not saying that's the case in the San Diego State example. It could have been he was just trying to keep the score from looking bad. Guess what? It didn't work. He still lost 90-64, and that's not going to look good in March when the tournament selection committee is looking at your resume.
Well, I brought that up because that's probably the main difference. From the 2 years that we covered the ACC tournament together, you're in a situation. One of the coolest things about that is if you watched the game and you saw something that just kind of looked odd, you got to sit down and in the room and just say, "Hey, can you fill me in on?" And I don't know if he was frustrated by his reserves, or if he was punishing his starters, or if he was trying to keep the score under 100.
Yeah.
And it just looked odd to the point where at the 7-minute mark, Duke had 87, and finished with 90.
I agree with you that even if he's trying to send a message, I'll say that if he's trying to send a message to either his starters or his reserves, you've got 2 more games to play in the next 48 hours. Probably better to send that message a different way than to wear your guys' legs out in games you can win. So I agree with you. Even if he is trying to send a message, that's an odd way to send it because you're really punishing yourself in that situation. So, yeah, I totally agree with that observation.
Well, and it came back to bite them at the start of game 2. I mean, they fell down by double digits. They looked worn out, and they were getting ready to get run off the floor by Xavier, and it took them until halftime to get caught up, and then they ended up taking care of business. So it'll be interesting to see how they do today because they have a very talented team. And the one thing about this draw, and Coach K talked a little bit about this, is they put together this field, and this field is so stacked that they didn't have room for Chaminade. Chaminade's the host team for this event, and they didn't have a spot for them. And Coach K was talking about how the tournament gets built around Duke coming over there. And you're in a situation, and let's talk about Virginia for a minute. The Battle of Atlantis is a relatively new tournament. And first of all, it's a great place to go. It would be a fun place to hang out for a week. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to go out and they plan these events ahead of time. You get someone like Virginia to come over there. And Virginia is the marquee team over there. So now, and San Diego State's coach was talking about this, that he said, he goes, that's how we recruit. He goes, we recruit players and say, if you come here, you're going to get a chance to do this, this, and this. And I think that, Virginia and Wisconsin, I believe, are the only 2 ranked teams in the Battle for Atlantis. But that's going to change. It's a situation to where it's mind-boggling as to how many of these events are held at this time of the year. And I'll date myself a little bit, but it used to be that the biggest one that was out there was the Great Alaskan Shootout. It was a situation to where it was the big deal to get to go there, and I remember when Duke went there when I think it was Trajan Langdon that was at school, but that was the event. It was the marquee event, and now you're sitting there, and if I'm not mistaken, there's at least 15, if not 20 of these that are being held this week. And it's great for basketball. It's great for teams. They're getting to go places and they're getting exposure. But it's tough when you play 3 games in 3 days. That's for sure.
Well, I'll say, there are a lot. The proliferation of these tournaments is really interesting. I'll be interested to see how Virginia responds to being in this environment because they haven't played in a situation like this for a while. They've played in some 4-team tournaments where they were clearly the team designed to win it, and they were there really just to get 2 wins. This is an 8-team tournament, and you listen to this field, it's not a bad field. You talked about there's only 2 ranked teams, but you got Florida, Oklahoma in the opener today. In fact, that's ongoing right now as we speak, as we're recording this podcast. Wisconsin's playing Stanford. That's the 2:30 game today. Butler and Dayton, UVA and Middle Tennessee State. There's not a bad team in that field. And so Virginia's played in situations like this, not this most recent group of Virginia players, Virginia teams, but we've seen Virginia teams in this kind of situation before, but the tournament wasn't built around them. There is more pressure when it's built around you. You're number 4 in the country in Virginia coming into this tournament, the Battle for Atlantis. You have to go out and win. You're the reason that the TV ratings will be whatever they are for this tournament. So you have to win tonight. You got to win tomorrow night. You got to play the championship game one Friday. That's pressure, so it's good pressure. It's getting you ready for games in March. It'll be interesting to see how Virginia responds because they've not been in this situation with this kind of in-season tournament, in my memory, in quite a while.
It's another step, if you will, to the national credibility of the program. I mean, what Tony has done there and the level that they've taken the school, because it's not something you take for granted when somebody builds an 8-team tournament an 8-team tournament around your school. And it's a situation, it's like with the coaches game where they do the Michigan State, Kansas, Duke, Kentucky, and those same 4 teams. It's that's the thing where I really think that Tony has the program on the cusp of breaking into that group. And I love the fact that he's not affected by, most people don't really enjoy his brand of basketball. And I love the fact that I don't think Tony cares. And so the fact that they're over there, this tournament's been built around them, and it's one of those things to where it will be a good test for them. And I'm really hoping they'll take care of business and enjoy their time over there.
Yeah, you talk about most people don't care for their brand of basketball. I've probably told this story before on podcasts, so if you're hearing it again for the 100th time, sorry for that. But when Tony got the job offered, I probably talked about this on this podcast with Jerry recently, but when Tony got the job offer and took the job a few years ago, my wife Crystal asked me, so Chris, tell me about this Tony Bennett. Well, he'll win games, but the score will be in the 50s. And she says to me, so will you enjoy that, games that are low scoring? And I said, I'll enjoy it if they win. And, of course, at the time, I was convincing myself of that more than anything else. I was thinking of myself having to watch a football team that ran the triple option, which I could not accept, by the way. So glad that Virginia went with Bronco Mendenhall. They were talking about the Navy coach who runs a triple option. I don't know if I could stand writing about a team that runs a triple option. I'll just admit that to you. I might have written about it, but I wouldn't have enjoyed it. But Tony Bennett basketball, I have really come to appreciate, and it's to a point where I watch every game differently. And the first thing you'll hear me say, and if you have the fortune or misfortune, as the case may be, of watching a game with me live, especially a non-Virginia game live, the first thing you'll hear me say is, these two teams don't play any defense. That's the first thing you'll hear me say anytime I watch a game. The first 2 seconds I'm watching two teams play, NBA or college, I'll say, these two teams don't play defense. And so, yeah, I've come to appreciate it. There are a lot of Virginia fans who've come to appreciate it. People who, and you're listening to this podcast almost an hour in now, and if you're a UVA fan, a lot of you are, you know this. We cheer as loudly or even more so for a shot clock violation as we do for an alley-oop dunk. The UVA fans have become educated and love that style of basketball. And the fact that Colin Cowherd and the rest of the smart people in the world don't like it makes us like it even more.
Absolutely. And there's a small, whether you hear it or not, okay, there's a small little bit of what UVA deals with is the same thing that Duke deals with. Okay? They're in a situation to where they are who they are, and there are people that watch just in hopes of seeing them lose. And Virginia's in a situation to where, again, I've repeated a number of times over the years, my only fear was that they would run Tony off, being familiar with Mount here at Wazoo, that they'd run him off before he made it his program. And now that it's his program, I think it's as elite of a program as there is. But I think we both know that if anybody needs to get to the Final Four this year, it's Tony. Not for Tony. I don't think it's for Tony's sake. I think it's for the sanity of the fan base. It's a situation to where I just love watching him coach. I love watching student athletes play basketball, and I love the shot clock analogy. It's a special thing. And even my last few times, Chris, at JPJ, I think that the fan base has become more in the know of watching them, of watching that team play. It was I felt like through the years, the four years that we had season tickets and didn't miss a game, when JR and Singletary were there, the crowd was there, but then it was somewhat of a casual crowd, where I think you see now that those are serious basketball fans showing up to watch UVA play right now.
Yeah, the analytics websites, KenPom.com, for example, Ken Palmer was great stats-based website that have subscriptions. They love the fact, I'm sure, I would love to know these numbers one day. how many UVA basketball fans subscribe to those websites, have to pay their yearly? Because I do. I have, as a writer, I have to. But I'd be curious to know because we watch the game that way. And so I'll say this to the Duke fans listening out there. Again, we're almost an hour into a podcast now. You heard – so when I said earlier that Duke plays defense, this is a guy who watches Virginia basketball for, 1,400 minutes a year. So I watch elite defense, and I just said Duke plays defense. So that is – I cannot pay a higher compliment to a basketball team than to say they play defense. So it's not just some random guy out there who watches teams score 100 points every night and then, oh, yeah, they can play defense. This is a guy who watches Virginia 35 and 40 times a year say you can play defense. So, Jerry, that's the nicest thing I could possibly say about anybody.
I would agree with that. And I think that your true listeners will realize that as well. It's a situation to where it was so funny because anybody you talk about at Washington State when Tony was able to recruit players there. Chris, I can't even give you an idea of how remotely placed Pullman, Washington is. And I mean, the only thing that's anywhere near it is Spokane. But you're just you freeze to death in the winter. And when he was able to get players to buy into his system and come to Pullman, Washington, I'm sitting here going, and it was funny, it was Harris, I believe, that followed him.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there and I'm just going, wow. His dad did it forever, and he's just coaching his dad's system. And I said, if he ever gets not taking any shots at Wazoo, I love all my hometown states or home state teams, but I said, if he ever gets a shot at a real job, it's going to be scary. But like I said, I was not affected by the Maryland-Baltimore County game. It was the situation. It didn't change my love for the program. It didn't change my love for the university. But I know I'm the exception to the rule. It's a situation. Switching sports just for a second. The Virginia-Georgia Tech game. That was a great football game. And the only thing I wish for in any kind of a sporting event, Chris, is that there's no bad guy. There's nobody that they got to put the camera on 8 times. You want teams to win. You want teams to lose. I felt horrible for the kicker for Virginia. Now, he didn't lose the Georgia Tech game, but that's the way it will get presented because he missed the kick in overtime. If you go back to Virginia in the Maryland-Baltimore County game, nobody lost that game. The team lost that game. And again, as you talked about early on in the podcast, they had not played a lot of challenging games where they had to perform in adverse situations. So hopefully they'll get a little bit of that over here this week in the Bahamas.
I think they will, and they need it. And for Virginia fans listening out there, don't. In fact, I in an odd, perverse way, I kind of hope we lose a few games this year so that you have to overcome adversity. That's an important thing in sports. It's overlooked. Fans, you want your team to win every game. The teams want to win every game. But you can learn from losses too. And unfortunately, last year, Virginia didn't get to learn from that last loss, and that's why we had bad dreams for months afterwards. I literally had nightmares for weeks after that game. Literally. I mean, not making that up. Had nightmares for weeks after that game. So quick thoughts, Jerry, on ACC football this week. I know Virginia Tech is a big game. Duke has Wake Forest, I think, and so a chance for Duke to get an 8th win. Go ahead,
Chris, I have two things that I need to mention, and one of them has never happened before. Mm-hmm. Okay, the ACC has 14 teams playing football. Uh-huh. Okay, 14 teams. Chris, 7 of the 14 teams, if you combine the standings, 7 of them are within 1 game of each other. You have NC State and Syracuse with 3 losses. And then you have 5 teams at 7-4. That's never been the case in this league. I mean, Clemson has won the league, and they've won it going away. Okay? But you have 7 teams. The bowl committee, there's 15 national projections. The bowls are having to figure out tiebreaker after tiebreaker after tiebreaker. And I just think, again, that the general perception is that the league's down. I don't think it's down. I think it's balanced. Now, on that note, I read something this week I was just dumbfounded by. And this was somebody who writes for Wake and runs a blog. And this fits into your game as well. Okay, this guy said on the internet, I mean, I have to laugh, but he said if Duke's smart on Saturday, they'll lose this game because they'll make more money. And the theory, and I don't know if the fans realize this, or the average fan might not realize this, but when somebody goes to a bowl game, okay, Clemson goes out and plays in the bowl game and gets $12 million, okay, the other schools get a cut of that. They get a cut of that. So this writer was actually saying that if Duke is smart, they will lose to Wake Forest because it's not going to affect their bowl game, and they'll get a check from Wake Forest going to a bowl game. Then he goes on, Chris, to say, we did it for Duke last year. I'm sitting here, so now as a Virginia fan, okay, and as a Bronco backer and a Virginia fan, Chris, is there any part of you that's going to get in the car and go to Blacksburg thinking, wow, if we could just lose this game and get a check for $40,000 from Virginia Tech's cut of the fill-in-the-blank bowl game? Is there any part of you that's thinking, wow, that's what I'm pulling for?
There is absolutely no part of me, and in fact, if there's a margin of error for that, there's even a negative part of me that feels that way. Yeah, it's funny but it's well said in one respect. I was just counting up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 teams right now in the ACC are bowl eligible. Wake Forest and Florida State are both at 5 and 6. Virginia Tech's 4 and 6 has that game scheduled with Marshall, if a conditional game scheduled if they beat Virginia this week. So up to 12 could be eligible, but no. Duke fans would gladly do a GoFundMe. UVA fans would do a GoFundMe if they had to make up whatever difference there would be. The Virginia fans would be more throaty about it, in fact, about the GoFundMe. If Bronco's able to break that streak, but it's a great point because this business is about money. You mentioned the money there. The whole thing about Virginia Tech, I think, is so interesting. I talked on a podcast, Scott German and I did a podcast after the UVA Georgia Tech game on Saturday, so we were already speculating then about what Virginia Tech would do in terms of its potential for a bowl game. And what we were talking about kind of came to fruition a bit. I said if I'm the AD for one of the schools that Tech reaches out to, I would rake them over the coals. I'd say, give me money and give me a future game on my campus where Virginia Tech's got to come play me here so I can make some money. And that's what Marshall did, and Marshall did even better. Marshall's getting $100,000 if the game doesn't play, and they get a future home date with Virginia Tech. They get $300,000 if the game is played in a future date with Virginia Tech, and they have an insurance policy that they'll still get money from the game they missed back in September. So, I said this, Jerry, in a column. I don't know the identity of Marshall's athletics director, but I'm voting for him for president in 2020. That guy can make deals. So it's about money. But you want to win the games, obviously, too.
It's funny because you mentioned Marshall, and I have a tie to Marshall in the fact that my boss at the Northern Virginia Daily, Chuck McGill, is in the situation where he's in the athletic department. He's been there a while and loves what he's doing, and he talks about his boss. And when I heard the breakdown on that, I'm going, kudos, well done. I mean, you're in a situation because, here's the other question for me on this, Chris. If you're Virginia Tech, okay, and one of the biggest things any coach will tell you, I've listened to talk about it for years, okay, what does the bowl game give you? The bowl game allows you to have your team practice for another month, okay? Here's my question for you. If you're the Virginia Tech program, are you not wanting to just play that game anyway? You obviously have some issues you're trying to work through. You obviously are in a situation to where something has went dramatically wrong. Why would you not just say, let's play that game? It gives us another week of practice. It gives us, and In other words, if you lose to Virginia, what Virginia Tech's saying is, well, there's no reason to play that game. I don't like the message that sends.
Well, I can see your point there, and I would say maybe the other side of thinking is this: one, it's $200,000 more out of your pocket. Nobody would go to that game. I say nobody. Parents would go to that game. It would be like going to a mid-major women's soccer game. There'd be very few people in the stands, so you'd really be losing money at that stage. And, here I'd say this from a safety standpoint. Football is such an inherently dangerous sport. Playing a meaningless game in that sense for Virginia Tech would be meaningless anyway. For Marshall, it would not be meaningless. For Marshall, they're going out for blood. They get to go to Lane Stadium and beat Virginia Tech and get an 8th win for their sake, or maybe even a 9th win because they've got one more game this weekend before potentially next weekend. Marshall wants to go to Lane Stadium and beat an ACC team. They want to do that either way. If they do go through with the game, if Tech beats Virginia, and they go through with the game. Marshall's going there not to give them their 6th win. They're going there to keep them from getting into a bowl. And to take money on their way out the door. So Virginia Tech really they get a week of practice, but they also expose players to injury perhaps. I'm even of the mindset, Jerry. To me, and I say this, and I've said this a lot, even whatever game Virginia gets into, bowl games that aren't part of the playoff now, to me, they're just exhibition games that, if you win or lose, fans shouldn't even have heartache over it because they didn't contribute to a championship game. It's kind of like the NIT in basketball. And so, I'm not saying the playoff's bad in that situation. I think the playoffs should be expanded. I think there should be more teams in the playoff. But to me, they're exhibition games, and certainly whatever game Tech would get into, you'd be fighting hard to break even on that from a financial standpoint. The payout doesn't justify the expense of traveling and all the ticket guarantees you have to make to whatever city you have to go to. So, it's for Tech, and I wrote a column about this. Essentially, for Tech, all this bowl game really means is that the line in the media guide about playing in X number of consecutive bowl games, they still get to leave that in their media guide. That's what that game would really mean to them, and it's kind of silly to say that, but I think that's really the case for them.
Well, Chris, I think that, again, the number one thing the bowl game gives you, it gives you another month of practice that other teams don't get. That's the number one thing it gives you. Number two, it rewards your players. It's a situation to where it also rewards your fan base. Now, I would argue out the point of how important those streaks are. When Florida State used to not have to recruit.
Yeah.
It was almost like Duke in basketball. We're going to just pick who we want. Okay? I'll tell you what, Florida State's going to play a real important football game on Saturday. And the other thing, factoring in, and again, I don't know that the average fan knows this. Okay? Notre Dame, while they have their separation in the football side, they fall into our bowls. They're in our bowl ties.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that we have 9. In actuality, we have 10. And if you're wanting your team to go to a nicer bowl, you're pulling for Notre Dame to beat Southern Cal this weekend.
Right.
Because if they don't, and they get knocked far enough down, it just pushes all of the schools down a notch. And it's a situation to where here's the next thing for the Virginia game, because again, Virginia and Duke are in the exact same situation. They're both 7-4. They're both already bowl eligible. Chris, how different does 8-4, ending it with a win, sound against 7-5?
Yeah.
I just think it's like the car. Why do they have the car sale for $19,999? Oh, because you got it for less than 20.
Yeah.
I think the difference between 7 wins and ending on a loss and 8 wins, and in Virginia's case, it's even more important to win this game than it is for Duke because it ends 2 streaks. It ends 2 streaks. It ends the streak of losses to Virginia Tech, and it ends Virginia Tech's bowl string, which I am sure it's used in their recruiting battles across the Old Dominion.
Yeah, exactly. It is, and for Virginia Tech side, I wrote a column about this week as well. and I guess comparing Virginia Tech, and actually it kind of wraps up our conversation about Tony Bennett from a few minutes ago. We talked about Tony and your fears that maybe he'd be run off before he had success. Well, by year 3, he was taking the retreads he had from Dave Leto's era, plus his young guys that he had recruited into the system, and he went to an NCAA tournament in that 3rd season. And that was key because year 4, they had a little step back. They didn't get the NCAA tournament, got the NIT. They were one of the last teams left out. Year 5, they won 30 games, won the ACC tournament, won the ACC regular season. I mean, since year 5, UVA basketball has been one of the elite programs in all of college basketball. But year 3 was a reason for year 5 and beyond. Broncos in year 3 now, and he's taken a program that 2 years ago won 2 games, lost to Richmond at home really bad. Lost that last game to Virginia Tech 52-10. Now he's got 7 wins. Still, I mean, it's kind of like Tony's team. Tony's team in year 3, Mike Scott was the best player. Mike Scott was a Dave Leto holdover. And one of the best players on this Virginia team in football in 2018 is Alameda Zacchaeus, a guy that Mike London recruited. But then there's a lot of Bronco guys. His defense is all Bronco guys at this stage. The quarterback, Bryce Perkins, a JUCO transfer from Arizona that is just perfect for his system. But it's still a young team, still building towards a future. But he's already got it at 7 wins. If you beat Tech and get to 8 wins with this young group that still has a feel of a team in development, that's great. And then on the other side, you're Virginia Tech. Now, if you're Virginia Tech, you look at your situation and say, okay, Justin Fuente won 10 games his first year, 9 games his second year. That's pretty much the same thing. 10-4, 9-4. You don't want to say they had a fall off last year because, largely that's the same record and everything else. This year at 4-6 with a 4-game losing streak, they're 1-4 at home. The one win being William and Mary. He's having players are transferring out. He had those 2 great recruiting classes. He's already lost all of his wide receivers from his first 2 recruiting classes that were 4 stars or above. It's just interesting to see all this going on, this turmoil going on. Now questions about Bud Foster's future at Virginia Tech, whether or not he'll be retained after the season. You're having to schedule a conditional game to maybe get into a bowl if you beat Virginia against a team that itself has already won 7 games. Now you look at it and say, which Virginia Tech is this? Is this the Virginia Tech that was 10-4 and 9-4 in Justin Fuente's first 2 seasons? Or is it the team that the 2 seasons before Fuente got there, Tech had to beat Virginia each of those last 2 years, the last 2 years of Beamer, to get to bowl eligibility? It's starting to feel like now, and the last 6 seasons at Virginia Tech, they've had 3 7-6 seasons and now a 4-6 season. And then the 2 different seasons are the 10-4 and 9-4 seasons, Fuente's first 2 years. So what's the real Virginia Tech? Is it the 10-4 and 9-4 teams? Or is it those teams that lose 6 games? It's starting to feel like maybe it's the teams that lose 6 games. So, yes, for Virginia, all that said now, Virginia on Friday has a chance to go out and make all those trends go in the direction of Virginia. For the first time and forever in this series, you go out and beat Virginia Tech on Friday in Lane Stadium. You're 8-4. They don't go to a bowl. That's their first losing season in 25-plus years. It's their 4th 6 or 7 loss season in the last 6 years. And, it feels like you finally made the switch. Finally, things have flipped in your direction. You go out and lose that game? Yeah, you still got work to do. And it kind of feels like you're starting over. And that would be a huge letdown for this Virginia team. So this game, even though, it feels like the teams are going in different directions, this game still is huge. And for both programs, for Virginia Tech, you've got to go win this game to hold. It's kind of like this is the medieval times and the invaders are outside the walls of your walled-in city. You've got your knights up on the top of the wall trying to shoot arrows down and keep the bad guys out. Virginia's the bad guys right now, and they're climbing the wall, man, and they're getting ready to come over and take your city over. They're sieging you right now. You've got to win this one to regroup and have another battle, and it kind of feels that way right now. It feels like that things are about to turn, but Friday is really important for both programs in the sense of where the direction goes from here.
Yeah, I would add 2 thoughts to that. I think this is the biggest football game Virginia's played in a long time.
Yeah.
It's just what it's going to do for the program. Everything you just said, just magnify it. Now, the second note, and I want you to look at this from a standpoint of the season. Now, normally the best team in the ACC not going to the college football playoff gets to go to Miami. Now, that's not the case. That's not the case this year, okay? Because the Orange Bowl is part of the playoff. So our best team not going to the college playoff is going to Orlando. So let's just pretend you're making your case to be that team. You're trying to decide who's that team. So from a Duke standpoint, let's say you win this game and you beat Wake and you go 8-4. This story will bring you back to Virginia Tech. You're 8-4. 2 of your 8 wins were against top 25 teams. Both Army and Northwestern are ranked right now. Army is going to finish 10-2, and their losses will be to Oklahoma in overtime, okay, and to Duke. Northwestern ran the table in the Big Ten after losing at home to Duke. So you're making your case, and here's the thing you never thought you'd have to explain as a Duke fan. How about that bad loss to Virginia Tech?
Yeah.
Think about that. Let's say Virginia beats Virginia Tech, and then they're done.
Yeah.
So now you're sitting there. You're not making the argument to get in the college playoff, but the difference in the bowls, and the bowls to me are my favorite part of all of sports. I've been sitting here with charts and the flow charts, and I got 9 different scenarios on which ACC team's going where, and it makes a big difference because it is something that we go do. Last year I got lucky enough to get to go to Duke and Virginia, but you're sitting there, and Syracuse is playing Boston College. Let's say Boston College beats them, because you could actually end up with a 7-way tie as to who's the next best team behind Clemson.
Yeah.
Now, it would have been Syracuse hands down, but they got thumped by Notre Dame. And if they lose to Boston College, they're on a 2-game losing streak. So this is uncharted waters for the ACC. The pile in the middle, not the middle, it's from 2 through 8. You're sitting there, and someone's going to get to go to Orlando. And then after somebody gets to go to Orlando, then you got those other 4 top-tier bowls. Those are the 4 that people are excited about, which is Charlotte, New York, El Paso, and Nashville. After that, so now you need Clemson to win, you need Notre Dame to win, and let somebody go to Orlando. There's only 4 spots there. So somebody who's going to tie for the second-best record in the ACC is going to Annapolis.
Yeah.
Think about that now. I mean, last year Virginia snuck in as bowl eligible at 6-6, and we're getting to go to a bowl game. Okay, someone has a shot of being 8-4 and going to Annapolis. And if everybody wins that's supposed to win, somebody could actually be 8-4 and go to the no disrespect to Detroit, but someone could be going to our last bowl tie. It's again, people, the ACC is down. The ACC is down. I just that drives me nuts. I don't think the ACC is down. You can say Louisville is down, but I don't think the ACC is down. And I think that and going back to your Bud Foster thing, take a look at what Riley did at Oklahoma.
Yeah.
He fired the brother of the guy that gave him the keys to the franchise.
Yeah.
Fired his brother. Now, who has he stopped since he fired his brother? Kansas, Chris, scored 40 points on him this week.
Yeah. It wasn't the coach. It wasn't the guy calling the plays. It was something deeper, right?
I'll be pulling for Bud. I'll be pulling for Bud to survive this. I don't know if he will or not, but I sure hope he does.
Well, and so to wrap it up, I'll go back to what you were talking about with bowls. There's so many times, that's why I don't even worry. All the projections that are out there, they'll just tell us where we're going. But here's me selfishly, and nothing against Annapolis. It seems like a nice city. I've only been there once, and the only thing I can tell you about Annapolis is the one time I was there, it was the coldest place outside of Nome, Alaska I can possibly imagine ever being. And it's not their fault. It was a weird weather, but just somewhere south of Charlottesville area, south. I want to go down 29 and go where at least theoretically it might be warmer. It might not be. Charlotte in late December can be cold. Florida can be chilly. Northern Florida can be chilly in late December, early January, whatever. But at least on paper, they might not be. And so south. I'm just hoping south. Somewhere below where we are now on a map is all I'm rooting for. Other than that, wherever they play will be a fun place to go.
Well, my closing thought on that will be we just call this bad luck, and we're only hoping for warm weather. But in order now, this will be Duke 6 out of 7. We go to Charlotte to start the run. It is so cold in Charlotte, we bought every blanket they had for sale in the building. Okay. The next year we go to Atlanta. That's the Manziel game. You're not going to get any warmer than Atlanta. It's freezing outside. The game was indoors, so that saved us, right? Chris, year three, we go to El Paso, Texas. You're going to make Nome, Alaska, your reference for the coldest place in the world. I happen to think El Paso, Texas has to be the hottest place in the world. Okay? We go to El Paso. You know what it does during the game? It snows, Chris. It snows. So we follow that up. We miss a year. We follow that up. We have to go to New York City at Christmas time. Again, temperature-wise. For instance, last year was Detroit, and it was -1 outside. And then, of course, you and I met up in Annapolis, where it was fortunate. I got to go to see both teams play. But yeah, it's cold, and then there's what we've been through the last 7 years. So you're sitting there. I would love to be the team that went to Orlando, because that would be kind of fun. But the one, and I think you guys have fallen in love with New York over the past few years, so you might not mind going to Yankee Stadium. But
I was just going to say, I made the mistake, Jerry, of letting Crystal know that the Pinstripe Bowl is a possibility. And she says, Pinstripe Bowl, what's that? I said, it's New York, Yankee Stadium. And she said, that's where we're going to go. So I want to go south where it's warm. She wants to go to New York so we can go to a Broadway play in between. So, yeah, there's competing interests as far as that goes.
Well, I read through all 15 people who nationally do this nationally, and the name that came up the most for us, win or lose, is Shreveport. And in years past, Shreveport, you got 2 teams going to the college playoffs, and then you're going to follow it with somebody going to Orlando, and then you have the 4 below that. So that's your top 7 spots, assuming that Notre Dame doesn't get tripped up. The next bowl after that is Shreveport. So that's the 8th slot somebody can be in out of our league. And Annapolis is 9th, and Detroit is 10th. So now we already have 10 teams. We already have 10 teams in, because Notre Dame is one of our 10. So now you're looking at Wake Forest, okay, Florida State, and Virginia Tech. If any of them win and get in, they're not going to an ACC bowl. Now, we have side deals with the bowl in Dallas, the bowl in Tampa, and the bowl in Birmingham, Alabama. They're the bowls, Chris, that are not listed amongst the other bowls. So that's the scenario where it's not over Christmas. It's in the middle of December. But I think Virginia Tech and Florida State would both take that and run right now.
They would, and the fans of Virginia are hoping that their Hokie friends are spending their holidays in Virginia, and we'll be doing our part. Hey, I'm gonna break us off here, but yes, for our listeners out there, Jerry gets to watch the Maui Classic in person tonight, which is great for him, and he'll tell us all about it next week. Also, I'm going to be in person for Virginia Tech. I hope that's something worth talking about, and Jerry and I will talk about that next week as well, and we'll compare notes on weather. Plus, next week we'll talk about more bowl possibilities. They won't be decided quite yet because conference championship games have to be played, but we'll have some more clarity next week when Jerry and I talk. So, Jerry, I feel guilty now because an hour and a half into this, I've been keeping you away from being outside in Hawaii, so I got to let you get back outside and enjoy some of this warm weather.
Yeah, they're about to tip the first game today, so It'll be a fun day, and I want to say happy Thanksgiving to you and Crystal and anybody out there listening. I hope the holidays treats everybody well. Have fun in Blacksburg. I'll be looking forward to next week.
Signing off, Chris Graham for Jerry Carter. Have a great day, everybody.